Hello and welcome to another edition of Better to Success, the podcast where I get to speak with seemingly ordinary people who've got extraordinary stories. And today I've got with me Andy Gallie. Andy, good to meet you again. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Chuck. Good.
And thank you very much for joining me today. And I know you've got a fabulous story, but you know the drill. We do a gentle reveal as we go along, and there's no big introduction or anything like that. So let's just dive straight in, shall we? Tell me about your life before the military, from a wee lad, a youngster, and what sort of stuff was going on in your life, and then the transition in your mind to wanting to join the military.
Yeah, so very early age, sort of growing up with two older sisters, mum and dad, and around five, sort of my parents split up. And my mum was really hard working, but under a lot of pressure herself. And around, I would say, up until 7 or 8, fairly normal, ticking along at school. And then at 9 years old is when my story really started, around gambling. And we used to go down to I'd say in-laws at a local caravan park. They had a static there on site. And we used to go in the clubhouse, and I was always pestering to go home, causing a few arguments, really, just wanting to go, not settled. And then one night my mum gave me some extra money and said, just, go away, kind of thing. And I started playing the fruit machines. And literally from that night on, it was almost like a comfort blanket for me. And
Yeah.
it just calmed all the arguments. It caused some peace within everybody. Everybody was happy because I was occupied.
Got you.
And from that day on, by the age of 13, my mum had actually called Gamblers Anonymous in, to try and stage an intervention. I got to that point already by the age of 13. 14, 15, working in a local hotel, doing the pots and pans. By 16, I was working on the bar. And that's really where the first sort of theft and fraud come in, working on the bar. I would serve rounds of drinks, not putting through the till. And that escalated my gambling even further, then queuing up outside the arcade at 9 o'clock in the morning. And college work was taking a hit. Life was just quite messy already. At about 18, I met
Well,
my
let me
first
just
wife. Yeah,
let me just stop you here,
yeah,
Andy, because I'm really pleased that you're being open and honest. What I want to dig a bit deeper into, and you know the drill. If you want to talk about it, that's great, and if you don't, you can say get lost, Joe. I'm not saying about that. What I'd like to know, because you're giving me a great breakdown of when it started and what happened, and probably why it started in the first place. But one of the things, because we had a discussion about this, without naming any companies, but people will know instantly. You've got all these celebrities on TV now, giving adverts on gambling, gamble responsibly. Well, what does that mean, eh? But what pulled you in? Because I'm not sure that when the marketing of gambling started. So what got you hooked? Because you started at 9.
yeah.
What was going on?
I think it was so. I've done a lot of work on myself. Now we can go into that later, and I've a lot of reflection. And as I say, one of the biggest things was the peace that it gave me. So, that's within the family, and sort of, it calmed all the arguments. But it also, for me, I've always found that my head is so busy. It's, I'm currently going for a diagnosis for ADD potentially, and what it does whilst I'm gambling and playing the machine, it gives me complete peace. My head stops, all of the other thoughts stop. And, whilst I'm stood in front of that machine, I haven't got another problem in the world. All of my issues go away. I'm not thinking about anything else other than what I'm doing.
And what happens when those reels or stop spinning and they drop and you don't win? What's going on then?
I think it's straight away, especially, I don't know so much at that age, but it probably was, is you go into an automatic, right, where do I get my next money from? So
Yeah.
if I've lost and I haven't won, that instant is, right, where can I get more money? you know. So, and then if you can't find more money, then you go into quite a deep depression of what you've done. The reality hits home, and all of a sudden you've got a massive loss, and sense of just dread comes over you, and that is now on top of all the other problems that, as I say, I was trying to escape from. So all it's done is escalated it.
Yeah, and because about my story, not about gambling, but when the doctor, the consultant surgeon said, "Oh, you broke your neck, mate." Well, he never said it like that, but you broke your neck, mate, and you're paralyzed. And I went into denial, right? So that was the reels dropping, and it was a lose, because I was supposed to do the New York Marathon the following week, and then he tells me, "No, mate, you're not doing that. You're paralyzed." In my terms, anyway, that's what he said to me, and I thought, flipping heck. So I get where you're coming from. You get denial, you get shock, anger, even, because whenever there's a trauma, you get the instant shock, denial, anger, and I suppose then there's the forgiveness or acceptance, which is something that you know all about as well, in a big way. So tell me about the part where you feel a massive sense of loss and you're thinking about where's the money coming from, and I suppose that's what drew you to taking other routes, if you like, to get money.
Yeah, I would. There's absolutely no shame felt at the time. You're just in this, I need to get my next fix. And if we relate it to drugs, especially, people would straight away go, "Oh, I understand that. You were trying to get your next fix." But that's what it was with gambling. That was my buzz. So money to me was only ever a tool to be able to get my buzz. It was only ever the substance, almost, that I'm then putting into a machine rather than into my body. And win or lose, it almost become irrelevant a lot of the time. It was just, that was what I needed to do, and I'll find another way to get it. And it sounds really shameful, and it's absolutely abhorrent behavior, but I'd have taken probably from anywhere, whether that be family, whether it be friends. I would lie. I would tell them a massive bill has come out, or my car's broken down, or I'd come up with a whole raft of lies to get people to lend me money, or to give me money, or to take it from somewhere. So it's very opportunistic. And then as you get later on in life, you become more skilled at it, unfortunately, and you become what I would say is almost a bit of a con man. You've got the mask on, you've got the mask that you look okay, you sound okay, and people believe in you. And I think that's why it then hurts people a lot more, and I affect a lot more people, because they start questioning their own judgment. They've judged you, and they're like, "He's a nice guy," and I'm pretty sure 95% I am a decent person. But if you get me when I'm in that 5%, and when I'm gambling, it probably the worst person you could ever come across for messing with your own mental health. And we talk about affected others. What's often missed, the families, the children, your parents, and then you start looking wider. Your partner's family, your partner's friends. Then you start getting onto work colleagues, as I say, where they've gone home at night thinking, I thought I knew that guy, I trusted him, I wanted to trust him. They then potentially start questioning their own partners, their own family. Are they lying to me? Are they? The ripple effect that I've had through my gambling is far and wide. And I think that's one of the dangers that people don't always pick up upon is, it's affected me. However, I've affected many, many people through this. So.
Yeah. And if I can so I've got it in my mind, because every story's got a start, a middle, and an end. Your story's not ended by any means. You're well into the middle now. When it started, then, am I right in thinking, because I'm really grateful for you sharing this, because I know nothing about gambling addiction, and I think that people, when you're listening to this, if it helps you in some way, that's great, because we had a chat about this, didn't we? And how we want to help people through this podcast. So would it be that when you're at an early age, when your mum and dad split up, for which I'm sorry about.
Mm.
Was that sort of an escapism for you when you were going on holiday and you just wanted to get away from all the stuff that was going on in your head? And that's where it
Yeah,
started?
definitely. Yeah, I think even earlier, as I say, it was quite a, let's say, a volatile sort of end to their relationship. Um, and quite often I find myself upstairs in my bedroom hearing it. You know, you got that fear, you want your dad to come up, or you want so from a very young age, I remember a lot of volatility and,
Yeah.
you know, sort of seeing some things that probably a child shouldn't see or go through. My As I say, I'll say my poor mum, it sounds bad, but with her own mental health and struggles with mental health, um, you know, that was also very up and down. We didn't know where we were, or, you know, I was
Mm.
okay 1 minute, the next minute I would do the same thing and you would be berated for it. Or, you know, and I think one of the things that always strikes me is people over the years have given me many opportunities to be honest. And they will say, just tell me the truth and we can work with it. And that strikes such fear into me because my mum used to say
Oh,
exactly that. She would say, just be honest and we can deal with that. I'll help you. And you're honest and you maybe get a verbal barrage or you even get a physical, you know,
right.
clout. So from a young age, I've grown up fearing that when somebody says, just tell me the truth. Um, so I think that played a big part as well. It's keeping
Uh,
it hidden.
and that makes why doing this podcast is pretty remarkable. Because I'm
Mm,
talking about be honest, and you're thinking, get lost, mate. No way. And I suppose one of the reasons we trust each other is because we're from a brotherhood, aren't we? And a sisterhood. And we know that the only objective we've got, our mission, is to help
mm.
1 million veterans and business owners do better. And in fact, beyond that as well. So thank you. How did you get on with your sisters and how were they affected? Without going into too much detail, because you know they're separate. Well, how did
Yeah.
your relationship with your sisters go?
No, I think again that ended, or say ended. They were quite supportive. We were quite a close knit three for quite a bit of it because, as I say, with my mum's struggles as well, and she worked, as I say, extremely hard, 2 or 3 jobs. So my eldest sister would quite often be left in charge of us, and we
Yeah.
felt like a tight knit three. But I think as my gambling escalated and my mum's attention was almost purely on me because of that, and it was causing so many arguments in the home. I think my sisters clearly resented that. I would then react towards them because they were blaming me,
Yeah.
and it just I think it grew us apart a little bit. Sadly to say, I mean, my eldest sister, she's lived in New Zealand now for well close on 30 years, I suppose, 25 to 30 years, and she's always worried about me. It doesn't matter what I do, she's very much got a compulsive nature in her own life and that addictive personality through she runs triathlons for New Zealand, still does now
Wow.
for the over 50s, played rugby for New Zealand, England universities. And it's that compulsion. She can't start until she's done a 20-mile bike ride in the morning. So she knows how strong that need to fulfill that is or what we're running from,
Mm.
so I think it has impacted their lives, definitely. Knowing their brother that they love has, gone on to do what he has and worrying about me and as I say, openly talk about suicide ideation. I've gone from that very early age of even around 15, 16 to just wanting it to be over.
Mm.
Life, life after gambling, life after a loss, life after just not being able to deal with it. I didn't want to be here. And unfortunately, that has stayed with me up until I went into rehab in 2022.
Well,
Suicide for me has always been a when, not if for me. And that's
right.
sad,
Okay.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And before we get to 2022,
Yeah.
we'll come back to 16, where you've been having these suicidal tendencies, or pretty much bang
Mm,
on. That's what was going to happen. And what
yeah.
what help did you get, or who did you meet, or what prompted you thinking, all right, I'll join the military. That sounds like a good idea.
It was obviously growing up in Cornwall, it's very much hospitality kind of industry, that economy. And there's not a lot of hope in that. Sometimes, it's busy in the summer, nothing going on in the winter, and I just don't think I wanted that. I needed busy again. And but to be fair, it was never a career move. It was one that I went up to the job centre one day, and there were the three cards on the job centre wall. We used to have cards on the wall, and there was the Army, Navy, and RAF. And obviously, I wasn't stupid enough to go for the Army. I
Oh,
didn't fancy the
thank you
hotels with
very
the
much,
RAF,
mate. Or is
Like,
that you weren't
yeah,
hard enough to go into the army or whatever?
yeah, 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 yeah. I didn't like hotels too much, so I avoided the RAF. And
Oh, yeah, of course.
yeah, but it literally could have been any one of those three that morning. I just went,
Yeah.
oh, the Navy, I do, and yeah, made the phone call to the careers office, and luckily it was a recruiting period, and I think literally 3 or 4 months later, I was almost in.
So there was, yeah, that was no messing about. And I suppose while both of us will agree, there's absolutely no drama with being in the hospitality industry because we need that. The fact is that because, and I'm only making assumptions here, because you probably had a bad experience with working to get your money to gamble, maybe you wanted to break away from that and think, well, the Navy's going to do it for me. It'll take me. I can join a ship, see the world, get around, and forget everything. So, what happened, and where did you go when you joined up?
So I joined up. My first draft was to HMS Drake just to complete my Part 4 training, and then I went down to SM2, which is a submarine UPO, unit personnel office, and then I joined HMS Coventry, was my first ship, and that was due to go on a global deployment, I think, and I ended up getting landed medically just before they deployed, so I missed a global deployment. And I was then drafted to HMS Cumberland just at the start of the second Gulf War, 2002. And we went out then, all around the Gulf, into Karachi, places like that. And I think we come back from there. We'd done an 8-month deployment, and again, that sort of just the drafts that I had. There was a lot of short time because what they would call a shiny ass. As a writer, as a clerk, I was
All right,
whatever you want to
shiny
call it,
ass. Yeah, shiny ass.
shiny
Right.
ass.
Yeah.
So there was quite a bit of short time, but I then ended up on. I think I then went to Norfolk, HMS Norfolk, no, Montrose, and done a short stint on HMS Scott. Then at FOST, Flag Officer Sea Training, and finished then on HMS Endurance, which was the Antarctic survey vessel.
All right. Okay. How did you find that? Which ship was your favourite and why?
I mean, the Endurance, without a doubt, just because it was quite plush. It was 2-man cabins. It was down in Antarctica, one of the most remote places in the world. Seeing things that very few people get to really see down that far. But very close knit ships company. It was a really, really good time. Until obviously the end of that deployment. Well, near the end of that deployment, and it almost sunk.
It almost sunk.
Yeah.
What happened there?
It was an engine room malfunction. Should we say? I think the chief stoker was taking a lid off the saltwater tank. I think it was, and there was an ingress of seawater that filled the ship within no time at all. And there was a film crew on board at the time. They were filming Ice Patrol. I think it still aired on Channel 5, and they got off, but the ship's company were bailing out for about 48 hours with metal rubbish tins, until somebody could come out and tow us back in. So it I think for the ship, a really scary time. For the crew,
that must have been a bit hurry, really.
Yeah, and I think just some top skill from the officers in charge that day, and a couple of the senior rates that played a big part. They saved it from going down, really. But I think at that point it made me question myself. And as I say, right throughout my naval career, unfortunately, I had again, sort of I brushed over it, but I gambled in every single port that we ever went into.
So you must have been pretty crafty then to be able to
Mm.
have that addictive behavior and not be spotted, really.
Yeah, I think what happened was because of the drinking culture in the Navy, and I certainly took part in that as well. You know, there was times I would never say, I don't think I was ever an alcoholic, but then people would say that. But I was a heavy, heavy drinker and took part in, you know, that social side of things way
Yeah,
too much. And I think the officers would then put it down to that. Oh, it's down to his drinking. He's acting up because of his drinking, when the reality was quite often I'd be drinking to drown my sorrows, or I'd be drinking to celebrate a win. So that was the other side of gambling, is the cross addictions.
yeah,
You know, I'd often drink as much as I could to forget big losses and just lose myself. Or if I won, you know, you're celebrating, you're buying everybody drinks, you're the big laugh and joke of the party. Um, so yeah, I think my behaviour around that was put down to drinking and just, yeah, being one of those lads.
and excuse me if I'm looking down, it's because I'm making notes because
There you
I'm,
go.
I'm, I'm a prolific note taker. And what I recognized there, right, was that you addressed the drinking to drown your sorrows before the drinking to celebrate a win. So
Mm.
is that just by coincidence, or do you think that it's psychologically in that order because most of the time you were losing?
Yeah, I mean it's a crazy thing, but there was so many times that, like, I don't even call them wins, because you would win, and the reality of it ever is it's a short-term loan. Like
Yeah,
these companies, the industry, very much, they know, with a prolific gambler like myself, with a compulsive gambler with a problem, they could give me £1 million tomorrow. Next week, they're getting £1,001 back.
mm,
There was very little risk to them giving me big wins. But that night, or over those next few days, I think I'm king of the hill. I think I can do this as a career. That delusional way of thinking that, see, I knew I'd get this big win, and now it starts, I could do this as a profession. Like, mad.
yeah, and that's just triggered something off from when we were talking the other day, and you know, when they give you on one of the betting companies where they're anything to do with the thing above you, you know, where the sun shines, or anything
Mm,
to do with bet and a name, right? Uh, they give you £10, don't they, as a
mm.
free gift? What do you think the purpose of that is? Just in case I
I
don't
think
even know.
I think there's two sides to that, or maybe even three. But there's one is obviously for the new players, to give them a taste of it, to give them that first win. And as I say, that first win for most people is that's then their mind map. So when they think about gambling, they will remember back to that. Well, it turned free money into however much.
Yeah,
I think the other side is it's really quite a cruel tool that they use for people like myself when I'd run out of money. And I would then start getting emails through with free bet offers, and, oh, we've noticed you haven't played for a few days, have £50 on us, or have £100 on us. It went up and up the
mm,
more I started losing. So that was to ensure that I didn't probably seek help or talk to anybody about it, because I'm back in that loop again. And I think those kind of tactics, you know I'll always say it, I don't have any hatred for the industry. It is what it is. I made choices,
mm,
but they absolutely preyed on my vulnerabilities. And morally, I find the industry absolutely shot to pieces.
mm.
But for me, there's so many people that probably still do use it sensibly, same as alcohol. So yeah.
And I suppose that's the third element, isn't it? The people who use it responsibly. Now, there's a thing as
Mm.
well where they say gamble responsibly. How does that work? Enlighten me, please.
Yeah, it doesn't sit well with me. I think all of the strap lines, they're too soft. If we look at cigarette packets where you've got pictures of broken lungs and
Uh,
hearts ripped to pieces, that kind of messaging, I believe, is needed for gambling. With pictures of devastated families and bare cupboards and people, as I say, at that point of thinking about suicide. So strap lines such as take time to think or when the fun stops, stop, I find them a bit degrading and actually cause quite a lot of stigma for me, because that's what society believe is, well, just stop. Like, just take time to think.
Yeah.
If it was that easy, believe me, I would have many years ago.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because it always does interest me. And I know young lads who just said, "Oh well, let's just have a bet on this and that," and I have words with them and say, "Look, if you can control it, yeah." It's like they don't say to you before you go to for an operation and you're going to go under general anaesthetic, "Oh well, it's best not to eat, but you can if you want." Just say nil by mouth, and that's it. And if you eat anything, bud, you're not going in. You're not going under.
Yeah, I do. I think you mentioned young lads then as well, and I think I mentioned yesterday about the gaming industry, and young lads with FIFA player packs. Some of the people listening might have children who are constantly on at them to please, can I just, or Fortnite, or there's many games now with in-app purchases, and that is your next generation of problem gambler coming through. They get hooked on these games. They're compelled to get that next pack or that next spin. And if you look at these games, they have inbuilt spinning wheels, the lucky wheel, or reels even on some of the apps. And, that's quite a scary thought as well, is just those children that are growing up with the phone in their hand, that have 24/7 access to the gambling. As they get to the age where they can gamble, that's already inbuilt. That risk reward is already inbuilt in them. So yeah, quite scary, really.
And you mentioned about, I mean, I use the term young lads. I mean, young girls as well. And what is there any scientific research being done on what the proportion is to males gambling and females gambling, or is it like a 50-50 or what?
I think there's been a lot of research carried out. There's a lot of research still going on. But what I've noticed myself in the last few years, especially, is that women are definitely finding it easier to come out to address it. But the stigma for them is far stronger, higher, whatever word you want to use in society, that, well, you're a mum, like, or you're a grand, they don't gamble, they don't. But actually, if you look at the targeted advertising in the mornings around, stereotypical times, and I apologize if I sound sexist, but it's still very much the mum drops children to school, comes home, sits on the sofa or does her work around the house whilst the telly's on, and you'll have all of the Foxy Bingo adverts. You'll have bingo saying join the community, are you lonely, come and have a chat, join our club, as such, making it to be very friendly. And there's also the sites, such as Omaze, the house straw people, and Good Morning Britain with their £2 with Andy Peters, all excitable and making it okay. And actually, I'm finding a lot of people are getting hooked on those at £2 a time and phoning up 20, 30, 40 times a day. So
and that
so
seems,
much targeted.
That seems on the, sorry for cutting across you. I think that was an important point. That seems like harmless, doesn't it, on the face of it? Just £2. And then doing it 30, 40, 50 times to get that buzz, to get that, and the success rate must be low.
Yeah. My son got caught up a little bit, I think, I think it's BOTB, or it's this supercar draw.
Right.
And that was very similar. And I started to panic then, because he was, buying into this world that you can win your way ahead, and so yeah, I think they're another real concern for people to be aware of.
And I believe in calculated risk, which is gambling, really. Like in business, I've taken some risks that normal people wouldn't take. But the fact is, I've got control on the odds. I've got control. I don't have control of everything, but I know what the ramifications are of failure. And if I do this, I'll reduce the risk. But to put 100 quid on a three-legged donkey who's got a lucky sounding name, it doesn't work for me, because I'm betting on the donkey, and I'm betting on the jockey, and I'm betting on the bookies, and I'm betting on whether it's fixed. So there's so many things that are taken away from me. So for me, it doesn't work, but I'm sure that there are people get sucked in, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I've met some people in my recovery that are, well, were around the financial industry with shares, stocks and shares. And they always said the same, it's very calculated. But obviously with stocks and shares, you've got the risk of anything happening to that company that day. And I think your sort of way of thinking is absolutely probably one of a healthy gambler as such, because actually I can afford to lose that amount of money and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, yeah,
And if you lose it, there's not then a drive to chase those losses. So,
yeah,
whereas for me, because it wasn't about the losses, it was the buzz. So I'd do anything to find that buzz, and whether that be speeding in my car, whether that be, road rage was always a thing, or, if somebody said jump off that cliff and just with that parachute, I probably would have done that
yeah,
because I needed that buzz, and
yeah.
gambling gave that to me.
Exactly. And like in my role as a financial advisor, which I've been doing since, way back, I always talk to people about inherent risk and real risk. Like for instance, doing an ISA with £20,000 in stocks and shares, right? The inherent risk for two types of investors is totally different. The inherent risk to a millionaire, if they compared to a retired person, an old age pensioner, if you like to use a traditional term, if an old age pensioner has just got £20,000 and they put it in the stocks and shares, right? And then the millionaire puts £20,000 in stocks and shares, and the market crashes, or it crashes for a while, then the real risk, the inherent risk is both the same. The inherent risk is the markets can go up and down, and you may or may not get back what you've invested. The real risk to the pensioner, though, is boom, that's index. Whereas to the millionaire, £20,000 losing that, oh yeah, okay, I'll just reach down the back of my settee and get some more. So I totally get where you're coming from on that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that's the sad thing with gambling is you can, if we take again, relatable to drugs and alcohol is there's a limit on how much you can take, inject, smoke, or drink that day. With a gambler, you could have given me £1 million, and say I could probably lose that in a matter of hours, if not a day. My
Wow.
biggest win was over £120,000, and I couldn't tell my wife at the time because I shouldn't have been gambling, so it would have ended. Could have even ended the marriage. So I've gone to bed at about 10 o'clock at night. Woke back up. Couldn't really get to sleep. I'm buzzing. Life sorted. I was only 27 years old. Married quarters were for sale at the time for £40,000 in Plymouth, where I was living. And midnight, I got back up, couldn't settle. I was just going to play with a couple of £1,000 of it. And it was at the time where you could reverse your withdrawal. So I'd already asked for the money out, but it stays there for 3 days. And at
Right.
any point, you can reverse it. And by 3 in the morning, I'd lost it all and deposited everything that was left in my bank, which was for the rest of the month shopping, bills. My wife got up the next morning and said, "Oh, just remember we need to get milk and all today." And I've absolutely gone off on one. I've blamed her because she should have got it last week when we had all that money. You should have known I'm a gambler. You should know. Like it just on what planet was it her fault? But at the time, anything to deflect from
Yeah.
me and my behaviour and what I'd done. And that's why I openly talk about sort of, the domestic side of things, which is emotional abuse, financial abuse. And again, not conscious in the slightest, but you will do anything to keep a person away from your one true love. And my one true love was gambling. And that continued to, I can't imagine what it was like living one day, living like a king, and the next day living like paupers and having no input into that. She had
Mm.
no say over that whatsoever. So she could get up in the morning and, like that day, life is ruined for that month at least.
I,
So yeah, there's something to reflect on again, just that impact.
and thank you for being so open about that, because how long were you married for?
15 years.
Um,
Got married very young at 19.
19.
98.
So by that time you were well into your gambling, and I suppose being the master of disguise, if you like, she knew
Yeah.
nothing about it, did she?
No, I mean, you know, you meet somebody and you always have that honeymoon period anyway, where you're on best behavior. But for me, I had to be on absolute behavior, you know, to keep that hidden. I think Joanne, my first wife, was aware from quite an early point that I had a problem, but nobody could ever imagine, you know, the depths that that would have got to. I think, you know, at that age of 18, 19, you probably think it's a phase that, you know, he'll grow out of it. I thought joining the Navy and growing up a bit and having children that, you know, I've got responsibility. That helped me stop then. If anything, the extra responsibility just and the extra pressure and the extra stress probably escalated it, if I'm honest. You know, I should have dealt with that well before.
And at the time, thank you for recognizing and sharing with us that you should have dealt with it. What sort of assistance was available? What sort of help could you have got had you have wanted it?
And I can only say that I remember my sister looking when I was in Cornwall, especially, and the nearest GA group at the time was in Exeter. You know, so probably 2 hours away, hour and a half, 2 hours away. At 18 years old, didn't drive, no real way of getting there, and it's a GA group. You know, so now that I'm involved in and around the recovery space, there's plenty of treatment providers out there that are absolutely amazing people. But I think sometimes until you're in it and you're looking for that support, you wouldn't know it's there. So it's raising this kind of awareness to say, yeah, there is help out there. And yeah, absolutely. I'm one voice, but always feel free to get hold of me, you know, and
Well, hold that thought for a moment, because we'll
yeah.
come to that at the end, and I don't want to do any spoilers at this stage. So what happened to your marriage, and where were you in your military career at this time?
So as I say, the endurance, at one stage, I actually had my papers raised, I had my commissioning papers raised. I didn't actually know that at the time. The logistics officer had raised them the previous day, had them signed off. And there was one night where I got ridiculously drunk, as I did on board quite often, playing poker as well. And I've gone to go for a cigarette at 2 o'clock in the morning down in Antarctica, bright sunshine. And I've ended up having a run in with the officer of the watch. He was doing his midnight rounds, or, you know, his rounds, told me to go to bed. And I might have told him that I wasn't really willing to a few times. And that escalated. And, you know, the next day I was called up to the logistics officer's cabin, and she just ripped them up in front of me. She said, I'm not even gonna berate you, I'm not gonna bollock you. She said, that's what you've just done to yourself. And yeah, she ripped my officer paper up in front of
So,
me.
so
And
you were going to be
yeah,
commissioned to officer, and then
yeah.
she just ripped them. What did that feel like?
Do you know what? Sort of, I think I've been through some tough times and some losses and everything else, but that to know, I think what hurt the most was to know that somebody had seen my potential, was acting on that potential, and believed in me. Because at that point, I didn't. My self belief was so low because of the gambling that I didn't think anybody believed I had any potential. So to know that somebody did, and they were actively trying to support me, you know, into that career that they could see and the potential I had, it crippling, absolutely crippling to know that I had done that. You know, my actions had, yet again, my choices, my actions had resulted in pretty crippling, consequences, really.
And what did you do to comfort yourself at that time?
Well, straight away we were all on a beer ban, so I was Mr. Popular on board because they put the whole mess on a beer ban for about 2 months,
Right.
and I was due home on my R&R leave, so I left left the mess with a beer ban. But yeah, I think I just thought I'm done. Like this is like my career's done, everything's over. Because I'm also quite a catastrophizer. So one thing will happen, and I'll believe that's it. It's over. You know, I could have an argument with a partner, and I think that's it. The relationship's over. like that. I go from one extreme
Right.
straight away.
Okay.
So I think, yeah, when things like that happened, got home, I can only imagine what my mood must have been like getting home. But I think every time I was away for 4 months, my wife would save a bit of money up. She would manage to get the bills back on track. And within 2 months of being home, we're back in the same financial mess and same bills have built up again, you know. So, yeah, it was just constant, absolutely constant. And, yeah, I think in some of these countries, as I say, when I've had that suicide ideation, and you're just looking at certain areas in certain countries and thinking, well, you know, they're quite volatile. If you're in Sierra Leone or you're in Ghana, Kenya, I could easily say the right thing and get somebody to do the job for me, you know.
Mm.
And as sad as that sounds, they were options at times, you know. And I'm sure I pushed those boundaries sometimes. People that I served with would probably tell you that he was a great laugh and he was always the one to get up to no good. And I think the reality was I was pushing those boundaries, just hoping something would finally take me, you know. So
Pull the trigger,
yeah,
so to speak.
yeah.
So what happened for you to just think, I need a change?
I think it was the incident on HMS Endurance almost sinking sort of brings it home, brings, you know, actually I've got 3 young children at home. Maybe I can go out, get a normal job, and you know, I'll get my life back to some sort of normality. And so I put my notice in. I put my notice in to leave, and started planning from there. Really done a CIPD course, HR course, and thought I would go out and go into HR because that's where my skills lay. But again, and that was in 2011. Even back then, I don't think that the Civvy Street really understood the transferable skills or that, you know, those
Yeah,
skills
yeah,
that I
yeah,
had.
yeah,
Even though you had the certificate and you had a civilian qualification, you didn't have anything to back that up. You know, they're looking going military. Well, he's just been told what to do, when to do it, and you know that kind of mindset is very, very wrong. We're quite, you know, adaptable people.
yeah,
We're,
yeah.
you know, normally quite clever, intelligent people. You know, and we've picked up a real skill set over the years that, you know, stands us, if anything, head and shoulders above a lot of people that have just gone and got a degree. Or, um, yeah,
So what sort of challenges did you face when you were transitioning from the military? And how was your
I think
marriage
the
going? How
yeah.
was your marriage going at the time?
Um, Trying to think back on the marriage, so it would have been 2011. It's probably strained for many, many years before that because of my, you know, behavior. I think, you know, I'm not going to go back into the whole thing, but
No, no,
it
no.
ended up quite a toxic, no, but quite a toxic relationship at points where, you know, Joanne also had problems with spending, you know, so I'd go home with big sums of money. She'd have a spend up thinking, not knowing where the next one's coming from, I expect.
Yeah,
Um, you know, the transition is very, very difficult. And I think because I was living in married quarters, even more so. And one thing I reflect on now with people is, you know, you lose the banter, you lose the camaraderie. I lost a massive family. People talk about it as a family. I used to, whatever, mate. But you leave and it's like, actually, that is my family. You know, they're my
yeah,
people. And all of a sudden, I'm living in a world where they're not my people. They don't understand my banter. You know, they think it's crude or they think it's dark. And it's,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
for me, it's normal. So you lose all of that. But then with the married quarters at, say, £300 a month with all bills included,
yeah.
to trying to find accommodation that, you know, is maybe 900, £1,000 market rate, you know, food costs, bills, and potentially a lot lower salary or even unemployment, all of a sudden you feel you've lost everything. You feel that
Mm.
you've lost your status in the community, you've lost your standing, you've lost quite a bit of that self belief. And I think, you know, the forces make out that actually, you know, especially some of the resettlement packages, that you're going to be fine, you're going to work straight into work and it'll be all rosy and it'll be, you know, so you go out with this hyped up sense of I'm going to be management level somewhere. and that's not always the reality. And I think they should, they should manage that. I think definitely.
Mm. So when you got out, what happened? You found it difficult. You lost your family, and how did you deal with that failure or the sense of?
Um, yeah, failure. I never used to deal with failure well at all. It was, as I spoke earlier about catastrophizing. So I could fail at the slightest thing and maybe even just fail slightly. But for me, it was the end of the world kind of, was going to come.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's what I did feel like. I felt like a failure because I put my notice in earlier than what I had planned to do the 22 years. So I felt like a failure already as well. And looking for jobs. I ended up with a job at a National League rugby club. I went in as the administrator first and then ended up as general manager for just over 2 years. And that's really what put paid to that marriage on top of everything else. That I found very much the banter and drinking culture was very similar. And
All right.
my drinking probably escalated alongside the gambling. I was gambling 8 till 4 every day with my gratuity and half pension, whatever I come out with. And then working at night when all the volunteers were able to get to the club, and committee meetings would happen. And so all of a sudden I was out the house from 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning till 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, sometimes 3, 4 in the morning because I'd fallen asleep on the seats. So that kind of behavior, I think, was just the final straw for the marriage, really.
And then, so when the marriage ended, what were you looking? What was your future like? Did you end at the rugby club at the same time and get another job, or what?
Yeah. I think it was about 6 months later that I ended at the rugby club, but it will sound pretty horrendous, but it's out there. But I actually met my second wife that night. So I left my wife on the Friday, I don't know, collected my stuff at about 10 o'clock in the morning. And by 10 o'clock that night, I hadn't gone out looking for it, but I'd gone out drinking, and I actually met Victoria that night. Told her I'd been split up for about 6 months and straight in with the lies. Sold myself as this successful, doing well kind of person, and was able to put that act on for a good few months, until she, had those feelings for me. And again, you're back in that spiral. And you know, unfortunately, another partner who was massively affected by my behaviour and my gambling, drinking, and ways, really. So yeah.
So what was it? Because that marriage was for a number of years,
Mm.
fairly short-lived, it would be fair to say. Would you categorize that as? And what was it that made you or Victoria recognize that it's not working?
Was absolutely. I think there were so many times I was kicked out, a number of times, due to my sort of angry outbursts over at home, certainly around jealousy. And I think a lot of the jealousy come from deflection. She would be getting close to uncovering my gambling, and what I would
Yeah.
do is I'd throw out an accusation of infidelity to put her off track, and then all of a sudden we're concentrating on something she's done or not done, to take her away from my gambling. So quite often we would split up and then we were back together, and it was such a passionate relationship. We both loved each other like mad, probably fancied each other, but actually it was quite toxic for both of us as well. It was quite volatile, and she's a very strong-headed woman. I probably reacted to that because I needed somebody who I could manipulate, I suppose. And you know so yeah, it was always very, very up and down. um and then I took the job in London. Started off with the Not Forgotten Association, and say the patron there was, Princess Anne. Um, and to cut a very long story short, there within about, I think, 6 months, I moved up to London by myself. whilst waiting for family to move up with me, wait for Victoria to move up. And within that time, my gambling started in the local bookies, at the train station every night, waiting for the train, and then into the casinos. And to fund that, unfortunately, I ended up, defrauding the charity of around £47,500. I went in one morning, or I actually went home and told Victoria the night before what I'd been doing, and we agreed that I would come clean. So on the way into work the next morning, I emailed them, told them where to look, what I'd been up to, and I just wanted it over, because that could have carried on for a good period of time. So I'm not saying, oh, look at me, I gave myself up, but there was a good side that it was hurting to do that, and it was dealt with in the right way. I was turned myself in.
And let's be honest, when the chips are down, to coin a phrase, then it is quite a step that to own up and send that email. I mean, you must have been like, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? And what made you do it?
I think luckily for me, with my impulsive side, because that's the other side of the addiction, is it's very impulsive. I need everything. I'm able to type an email and just press send before I've even thought about it. So I always find the best way is if I'm typing an email and it's coming from a good place, or coming from a passionate place, I'm always best off pressing send before I go back and read over it, because otherwise I end up people pleasing or taking the easy option. So I had pressed send literally just before I got to work. I put my keys on my desk, and then I took the wimp's way out, which was, I'm just going to go get some milk from the shop or something, and then dealt with it by phone really once the CEO phoned. So yeah, and the CEO was ex-military himself, and I always remember him saying to me, and I put it at the beginning of the book, that I blame the sin, not the sinner. And that's, not to take away from what I'd done, but, he was very kind to understand that actually that sin is what drove my actions. I think he could see more in me and knew me enough as a person to, no, I wouldn't have done that anyway out of spite. It wasn't personal. It's just what I unfortunately needed as a gambler. I had to get my money.
Yeah, you had to feed the habit, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so after that, what was the rapid change you underwent, and how did it affect your life, your marriage, your children?
Yeah, so I went to court, and as I say, well, the police dealt with that. I actually moved back to Cornwall. My youngest daughter was living with me, and moved back down. Thought life is all going to be good, and I'm gonna go into rehab, and I'm gonna do this, that, and the other, and I'm gonna get fixed. And it just felt like every way I turned, and it sounds like an excuse. It probably is even now, that I would tell people, "Oh, there's nothing available. There's nothing I can do." But the reality is that suspended sentence probably felt like a win in itself. And I got with an ex-partner or somebody I'd known previously, and the same problems were inherent straight away. I was working somewhere where I was committing fraud. I was drinking heavily. I was making accusations of, infidelity, that jealous side again, and pretty uncomfortable kind of life, really. And unfortunately, one night I'd stopped drinking for about 9 weeks. We were going to couples counselling already. And, it was said, look, we're getting on so well, you can have a drink tonight. And I've drunk to excess. And out of all of the things I've done in my life and hurt people, it's the most abhorrent was I've carried out a domestic assault. We were going back in the taxi. I was adamant that she was in the front flirting with a taxi driver. It's massively escalated, and it's no lie to say that I probably remember 10-20% of that night even now. but I know I was capable of that from my previous kind of intimidating kind of ways and everything else. And it, I've ended up in prison, rightly so. And from that night on, I've not had a drink again. And I think it really, really scared me, the fact that I could raise my hands to somebody in that way. And so that was almost 6 years ago now. And that I found that very easy to give up the drink because of the consequences that come from it. And I think that's key for me is, change happens, unfortunately, sometimes when you hit rock bottom, or you suffer the real consequences of it, or somebody else did, unfortunately. So yeah.
Yeah, so I suppose that always sometimes redemption only comes after the darkest hour, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
unfortunately, some people never see redemption, and they end up doing the ultimate action, which is committing suicide. And by the way, you're listening. If you're listening to this, and it because this is right, getting to the raw nerve. Let's just break from your story. If someone is now recognizing that, wow, this is me, and they're becoming, I don't know, having some moments of anxiety or whatever, what would you suggest they do?
It always sounds like a very simple solution, and one that people go, but you've got to ask for help and accept help. I think it's got to get across that it's not soft. It's not, you're not stupid. You've gone through some terrible things and it's really difficult, but with help and with support of people like myself, with peers, there's a lot of peer support out there. There's a lot of lived experience that will support you into finding your right path. And as I say about organizations, there's some fantastic organizations out there that both offer both treatment or, talking therapy. It may be rehab yourself, but there are so many people out there that genuinely want to help you. So that initial asking for help is that can be found, whether it be online, as I say, whether that's contacting me directly, if anyone's listening to this. I'm more than open to supporting anybody and finding them that right path for them.
And we'll come to that shortly. I thought it was a nice place just to mention that, because someone might be now struggling if it affected them. So help is out there, and it's a great point. You should always ask for help. And a lot of people, especially, alpha males, which I've seen a lot of in the military, and hey, who knows? Someone might have said I was an alpha male at some point, and maybe the same to you. But the fact is that sometimes if you just drop your guard and ask for help, it's so important, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I refer to the story that came out yesterday, but the real life event. Graham Thorpe yesterday, and I posted about that because he was an icon of mine growing up. And I always thought he's very successful, quite a personable man, and he had this amazing life. Probably in my mind, that's where he was. And to know that he took his own life, and people would quite often have said he looked okay, he talked okay, he was successful. The amount of times that somebody has looked at me in that way and said, well, he talks very well, he looks okay, he behaves okay, like there's nothing wrong with him. And believe me, my head was a mess. So just because somebody looks okay, and that is another problem with gambling, is it's a very hidden addiction. You will very rarely know that somebody is suffering with it until either the financial devastation happens, or unfortunately the suicide rate is so high. And I myself had 2 attempts. One was very serious attempt, and almost got to it again just before, we'll probably go into it in a minute, but just before I sought help. And I could have easily been one of those statistics. My mum could have been a part of the great group of people. Gambling with Lives are out there, and there are a great group of people that have unfortunately lost people to it. And it's when people say, oh, it's just a bit of fun, and it's just, that's not fun. When
No.
you start talking suicide and broken families and domestic abuse, and this isn't a fun addiction. It's not a fun. The harms that come with it are immense.
Yeah. And during your time in hospitality, in the Navy, and then when you got out on the CEO, what a great line. It's the sin, not the sinner, which is an actual great, really charitable way of looking at it, actually. And so how important do you think it is to have a good coach or mentor to help you get
Massive.
through stuff?
Yeah, absolutely massive. I think I went into rehab in February 22, and whether I would call the guy, he's a therapist, but actually he become a coach and mentor to me, and he's certainly still a mentor to this day. We don't have as much contact, but we still do. And he had lived it. He had lived the addiction lifestyle for 20 years, lived on the streets of London at one point, and he's now been a therapist for 20 years. But his role, how I seen it, was as a mentor. He was a true mentor to me. He called me out when I needed to be called out. He called me a liar when I was lying. But he also gave me that hope. He instilled in me that hope that there was belief. He instilled belief in me that it wasn't the end. And I think just to have somebody to be able to turn to ask for that advice, ask for that support, certainly somebody who's been there and done it, and a bit, hence how I think I reached out to yourself in the first place. You asked yesterday why I reached out on LinkedIn, and that's one of the reasons, because coaches, mentors, they're normally people that have been through it and can actually say to you, right, just stop where you are. You're miles off where you need to be potentially, or actually you're on the right path. Right, let me just help you get that final hurdle. So coaches, every aspect of your life. I said to you yesterday, I continue to work on myself daily. If somebody points out maybe a slight flaw or a defect, I'm straight on it, and I'm looking, going, why am I like that? So what could take me? Now, what better way than to be able to phone a mentor or a coach and say, look, I've just recognized this. How do I deal with that? How do I cope with that? So I'm very lucky that I've got, I several, but I could list 10, 15 people, but there was certainly Steve Ramsey from Epic, you got Tony Parente at Gamlin, Steve Watts, Dave Hollingsworth. Like, there's people, honestly, that I could rattle off a whole list now, and I've probably just missed about 5 or 6 that have played a massive part in my recovery, without a doubt. And without them, I'm not saying I wouldn't have done it. I'm not going to put it all on them. I've put a lot of work in, but some of the snippets that they've just given me, and sometimes it's a little golden nugget of information that you'll take away from your coach or mentor sometimes. You'll sit there listening for an hour and think, oh, whatever, mate. And then it will say something and it's, got it, really, really important to reach out and, ask for somebody to support you, really.
And of course, having a great social network and business network, and not necessarily who are in the same deep brown sticky stuff as you are, but looking, because it's like when I go into my room, I don't want to be the cleverest person in the room. I'm not saying I should be the dunce either, but I mean, and then even if I was, I wouldn't mind that, because it means I'm getting in with people who know more than I do. So how important do you think having a good social and business network is in your development?
Yeah, massive. I think I'm recognizing more and more recently. I only joined LinkedIn a couple of months ago. Somebody gave me a chance. Beacon Counselling Trust took a chance on me to be the Armed Forces Education and Training Lead, so to deliver education and prevention work to the armed forces. And I think, building up that business network, especially, or the, professional network, just allows me to, or fulfills me to do that job, but also to spread the word. You talk to one person who then passes that on. Social network, absolutely huge. I wouldn't be here today without mine. And that sounds strong, but the peer support groups and just the peer support from people that I could pick up my phone today and probably have 20 people willing to give me a call and willing to support me. yeah, it gives me that strength to know that even on the worst days, I've got people there, but I think in business, if you look on that side of things, it's essential to have that network. If you're just going to go out on your own and think you can, become a success, unless your product is absolutely outstanding or got a catchy topic, then, you need a network. And yeah.
And how valuable do you think, looking back on your military career and the skills, knowledge, and wisdom that you picked up, how valuable do you see that now in what you're doing?
I think it really difficult. I think it gave me almost everything. I think the life skills, um, you almost grow up very, very fast, but you, you know, it's just the discipline is instilled in you from an early age. So I'm going to say, between right and wrong. I clearly, might have missed that lesson, but yeah, no, it does. And I think the professional skills, I think that just because the courses within the forces don't sort of have that certification with them, a lot of the courses don't carry civilian recognized qualifications. They can get missed sometimes, but it's all of those courses that you do year in, year out, or it's your professional training at tier 3, or, part 3, part 4 training,
Yeah.
that it can't be replicated. It's taught by some really passionate people that are absolutely, brilliant at what they do, and they pass that on to you. And I think I've learned from senior rates, as they're due to leave their service, they pass on their expertise and their advice, and you end up with all this advice over those years.
Right.
But also, a lot of the jobs within the forces are transferable. You've got the skills that could take you into, I feel like I walk into quite a lot of jobs now and adapt within no time to fit them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the key to it. As I read some job descriptions, they'll put me off. But as soon as actually you're in that job, you go, oh, actually, oh, is that all you want me to do? Or, so, and it is, I think service people just, yeah, give me a job and it's job's on. I'll do that job for you, so.
And now, reflecting on our conversation, which has been absolutely brilliant so far, we've got a few things to cover off yet. What's the one tip that you would give someone leaving the military or has already left the military, are doing really well and want to do better, or maybe not doing so well, or maybe you've got a drug or alcohol addiction, or they like it a little bit too much? What sort of one tip would you give them if it's at all possible?
I think it's a really simple one, is to be willing to learn. I think you said, earlier about walking into a room. I don't want to be, the cleverest person or the dumbest, but I think certainly for me at times coming out of the forces, there was still an ego. There was still an ego element. And I think I'd walk into a room thinking I knew what was going to be said or what was coming, or, and actually the most growth I've had as a person is when I sit back, say nothing, and I'm willing to believe that every other single person in that room has something that can contribute to me.
Yeah.
They've got something that they can teach me, and it's being open to learn. Simple as that. It's not thinking you know everything. Being very humble. Just be humble and believe that that person can actually teach me something.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
And it's like 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them proportionately, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which we do a lot of in the military, actually, because there's one person at the front telling you what to do. The rest of you can just shut up and listen. Yeah. Which is dead simple, isn't it, really? Sometimes not as easy to do. So what does the future hold for you now? After sharing the ups and downs, the roller coaster of your life, where are you going? When are you going to get there? And how do you know you're there?
Yeah, so I think I've been in recovery 2.5 years now. I went in February 22. My partner has stuck by me and just been absolutely immense. My children are, growing in confidence with me. The trust is coming back, and work-wise, I'm part of the alerts group, which is a lived experience group of people that, are assisting treatment providers to ensure that what they're offering is tangible from a lived experience point of view, so shaping it for future people coming into treatment. That's very fulfilling. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I've been part of the research with Swansea University or Milgam that has actually highlighted that the armed forces personnel and veterans are 8 to 10 times more likely to suffer from problem gambling. Should have probably mentioned that earlier in the podcast. People have switched off by now. And so I think the role that Beacon Counselling have kindly given me the opportunity with, that will be to go on and offer our education and training package, prevention package, to those who are serving, to veterans, their families, and anyone who signed the Armed Forces Covenant. It basically allows the people that take that training to maybe spot somebody a little bit easier, know where to signpost them, know how to support them, and just understand and pass the message out of how damaging gambling harms are. I'm really passionate about it. I think it's combining two of my passions, which are the forces and gambling. And I that's where I want to be with my life, really, is.
And you mentioned that statistic about the armed forces, members of the armed forces. What was it? 8 to 9 times more likely?
8 to 10 times.
To 10.
Yeah.
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 And what do you think? What do you think causes that?
I think looking at sort of the statistics that have come back again, there's a lot of different elements that go into it. Deployments, length of deployment, can affect that. The loneliness, the isolation, so lonely, homesickness even, if you're deployed down to a barracks somewhere or a naval base that's miles away from home, people don't mix like they used to within the services, and that's mainly down to single living accommodation. Again, gaming systems, people will sit in their accommodation gaming rather than going and mixing in the bar like we would have done. And all right, that wasn't always successful either, mixing in the bar, but it got you out of your room, and you had a social network, like we were saying just now. And now I think with the single living accommodation is one of the biggest triggers to that uptake in gambling, because you've got your phone in your hand, it's a 24/7 casino, nobody can see what you're doing. And you're isolated again, you're in on your own, you could be lonely, you could be bored. But there's also that competitive nature in the forces. Like we say about alpha male, it is very competitive. I think there's a culture of, and some within the hierarchy of the MOD don't like to hear it, but there is a culture of drinking and risk taking and chasing that buzz. So that plays a part as well. And I think there's many that join the forces that potentially have suffered childhood trauma. They may not recognize it, but a lot of the time trauma people think has to be one massive event. It's not. It could be 20, 30, 40 little events in your childhood that have led you to a belief that you're not good enough. Maybe there's other issues that you've been told you're something. And so I think that childhood trauma can then manifest itself within the forces. If it can be a very boisterous kind of environment. Maybe there's a little, I wouldn't say bullying, but that banter again, that very close to the bone banter, and that can end up triggering it. Or if you're in the army, you're on the front line, you're seeing things that trauma can trigger what was always underlying. So it again is an escape from what you've seen, is an escape from what's going on for you.
Thank you. And just mention again where people could get help before we go on to how can people get in touch with you per se. If someone's just struggling a bit, or this has activated something in the psyche and they're thinking, I need help, where could they get help?
So I personally used Gordon Moody, but that's because I needed residential rehab. You've got the National Gambling Helpline that's run by GamCare. You've got the NHS clinics now that are open. You've got sites such as, or I say sites, but groups such as GamFam that I use regularly. I facilitate groups for them. That's very much a peer-led group. If you find yourself in trouble with the law because of your gambling, then there's organisations such as GamLearn I could rattle them all off. I could always send a message with them, but there's Bet No More, there's Beacon Counselling Trust, there's ARA, and it's a national gambling support network. So, there's 14, 15 providers within that network.
Right.
And then you've got all of those that are branched off from that. So, as I say, I mentioned GamFam, that is for families as well. And that is, it's one area that really needs highlighted, is how much that affects families and others.
Yeah.
And that's what it was set up for originally, and it now helps those in recovery as well. So it's let's say peer support for me anyway was my savior really. But yeah, they're all over the country, and if anybody wants to get hold of me, I can happily, let's say, they all offer different treatments or different routes, so we can find you the one that suits you the best really, because everybody's recovery is different. Some people prefer clinical support, others prefer to talk to lived experience, and I think there's a way of it all working very, very well together. So yeah.
Thank you for that. That was really comprehensive. And finally, how can people get in touch with you?
I normally use Twitter or X, like to call it.
Yeah.
And LinkedIn seem to be my two that I use. Twitter I very much use for my gambling sort of, I wouldn't say motivational stuff, but my reflections I tend to post most days just to give others a look in. And then LinkedIn, as I say, especially for the training, and to book that, as I say, all of the training that I do is free. I just want to get that out there that I think some people can be put off.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And of course, it wouldn't be right of me to end today without letting you talk about your book quick. What's the name of your book? How can people get it?
Yeah, it's HMS to HMP. It's available on Amazon. So yeah, I released that in November 22. It covers everything, literally from, well, everything that I've just talked about, and probably a hell of a lot more. But there's something at the beginning of it, which is the 48 hours in a gambler's mind. And I think for a lot of people, if you ever want to know just why, is to read that 48 hours at the beginning of the book, because it is manic. And then somebody only said to me the other day, the goodbye letter at the end is very, very powerful. But I just wanted to put it out there, mainly for families, so they can pick it up if they've got somebody they're really struggling to understand. Why does he do this, or why does she do this? It will maybe just give them, and also it was my own cathartic sort of process that I needed to process it all. I needed to be able to be as honest as I am today. And, people may listen to this and think, what a prick or whatever. That's fine. I get it. But what I want them to know is that it is honest. And actually, those that are still around me and still talk to me are the people I need around me, because they know the true me. I don't have to look over my shoulder anymore thinking, oh, and I've done that, and I've done that. It's out there. And that's how my life will be moving forward. It's brutal honesty, but it deals with it,
Yeah, and by the way, you're very happily married now, which is fantastic.
Beyonce, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're on your way. Yes, sorry, yeah. My but well, you're nearly there anyway. So and I know she stuck by you through thick and thin. So
amazing. I think anybody who's able to stick by somebody with a compulsion, addiction, whatever you want to call it, and support them through and take an interest are just amazing people. And I think those that potentially walk away to save themselves are just as amazing, because at the end of the day, you've got to look after, number one, if you're around an addict, you've either got to believe in them fully and see that they're trying, or you've got to set your boundaries. And there's lucky people have in my life and walked away at certain points because I would have harmed them more, So yeah, whatever side of the fence you're on, I think if you've been around somebody with gambling harms like that, you're pretty amazing people. So yeah.
Well, listen, thank you for your service to the country. Thank you for what you're doing now. I think it's absolutely fabulous, and I know we're going to keep well in touch anyway. So thank you.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me on. So yeah, just to be able to get that message out there it honestly, it means a lot to me. So I think, I always say it, but if one other person one other person reaches out. That's all, you know, my aim is. So yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And remember to keep listening to Veterans for Success. And the membership site that I've got is joeteams.com. And remember, to successful become, visit joeteams.com. Thank you.